name is Marie Sims, and I was born and raised in Detroit. I grew up in Black Bottom. My address was 1327 East Hancock. I lived between Russell and Rivard, right across the street from what was the juvenile home at the time. And it's funny because I used to sit on my porch when I had free time and literally watch the kids try and break out of that building. One girl busted the window out, tied sheets together, and tried climbing down the sheets, and the sheets, of course, broke. I think the glass kind of sharded or cut it some, and she fell. She didn't die, but she fell down in all that glass. So that was kind of like the entertainment during that particular time. But like I said, I was born in Detroit.
Okay. That is an interesting story.
It is an interesting story.
What was the Black Bottom community like?
The Black Bottom community, as I got older and adult, I looked back on some of the things. The Black Bottom community was a mixture of families. We had families that were kind of well off a little bit, and then we had families that were, I remember the lady on the corner, she was retired, and she was not an older lady to us as far as kids were concerned. And then we had families that lived on the other side of us. I think, if I remember correctly, we were, in that particular block, the family that had the most children. We had, there were 5 of us all together. And my mother, she worked in Grosse Pointe as a maid because that's what they did back in those days. She would go and do live-in work, and then she would come home on the weekend. And I had an older sister who was 10 years older than I, so that, was convenient along those lines. And then she moved to another family where she didn't have to live in, where she could come home on a day-to-day basis. But that was her line of work. She did housekeeping, cooking, and the typical kind of stuff that blacks did for well-off whites in their neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned it was like a mix of people, some different economic statuses. Mm-hmm. How did people interact? Was there just
people interacted like there was nothing different? We all lived in a community. That's what it was. It was a community, and nobody held it over anybody else's head that they were a little more well off than the other person. As a matter of fact, the lady that lived to the west of us, and I don't remember her name, her sister and her brother-in-law lived there with them, and then a cousin also lived there with them, and she had 2 children. And I remember that she used to share her daughter's clothing with me. I would get all of the hand-me-downs, and of course, me being a black girl, some of them I liked and some of them I didn't like, because of course some of them back then I didn't understand, so on and so forth. But nobody acted any different other than the fact that we lived in the same neighborhood together. So it was like a family style, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Where did you attend school?
I went to Garfield Junior High, and I was disappointed because I ended up having to go to Northeastern. And the reason I was disappointed about that was because I had formed friends at Garfield Junior High, and because I lived on the south side of Warren and they lived on the north side of Warren, they ended up having to go to Northern, and I ended up having to go to Northeastern. So because of that, my friendship stayed the same. It was just disappointing that we couldn't all go to school together. And 2 of those girls that I befriended, we're still friends today. We talk to each other on occasion. Lives are different, and we don't talk to each other on a weekly basis, but we do talk to each other on a regular basis. So we've still kept that friendship together all these years. But that was a disappointment for me. I had to go to Northeastern and they had to go to Northern.
Well, it's good that you were able to keep those relationships.
Oh, absolutely. Lifelong relationships.
What were some key sites in Black Bottom that were important to you?
Okay, one of the key sites, and I'm not sure that I understand how far Black Bottom went, how far it extended, but as a young child, I was kind of sickly. So I had tuberculosis. So my mother kept me kind of close to the vest. She didn't let me, even though I was the second oldest, she didn't let me out of her sight too often. But one of the things I did get to do after I started going to high school that I really enjoyed was going roller skating. The Arcadia was on Woodward Avenue. That was one of my fun places to go. And Burners, if I remember correctly, was on Woodward Avenue as well. And I remember walking past Burners all the time and having such awesome thoughts about the inside and how they were making the ginger ale and so on and so forth. But riding my bicycle in the neighborhood, playing with my friends, and I was really also kind of a loner. I liked reading an awful lot, and sometimes you'd catch me in my room reading when the other kids were outside playing. I didn't want to be bothered. I liked reading, so that's what I did. I stayed in my room a lot reading, so that was my pastime.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Were there any key figures that stood out to you? Maybe just anybody in the community that comes to mind from Black Bottom that you want to recognize?
No, not really. Because I stayed so close to the house, I didn't really, pal around with a lot I played with some children in the neighborhood, of course, but I wasn't really focal outside of the house like that. So no, not really.
Okay. What were there any challenges or difficulties that your family experienced in Black Bottom?
Pretty much kind of like any black family, in a neighborhood that my father was in and out of the house. Okay, I have very limited amounts of memory as far as my father being there on a regular basis. And if I'm not mistaken, I'm almost sure my mother and my father were not married, because I remember after I got older, after I got out of high school and needed to get my birth certificate, I had to go to I had to go to Herman Kiefer, because all of the children that were born out of what they called wedlock, their birth certificates were in Herman Kiefer. And anybody that was born out of a marriage, they could write to Lansing and get their birth certificate. So that was, a challenge for later on. And then my mother finally got married, so I did have a stepfather in the house. And it was just a typical family, trying to get by, trying to make it. And my mother didn't work as much then as she did before my stepfather actually came into the house. But she still worked. She still did the same type of work, catching the bus, or, my stepfather he drove a truck, an 18-wheeler. So when he was at home, he would, pick her up, take her, stuff like that. So we had the typical kind of relationships where it was difficult feeding my family, with so many mouths to feed. And one of the things that my mother incorporated during our lifetime, we would have days where we would eat things like, she'd make a big pot of beans and some cornbread, and that would be our meal. I didn't think anything of it, and then when I got married later on, I would even incorporate that in my family, where our family would have meatless days. So at some point when I wanted to go vegetarian, it was easy for me, because even to this day, I can make a pot of greens, some beans, and some cornbread, slice up some tomatoes, some cucumber, and have me a good old finger licking meal. So those were the typical challenges that we had as far as a family, trying to keep enough food on the table to feed all of the mouths.
Mm-hmm. People often talk about how the relationships in Black Bottom was really important to the community. Did your family have those types of relationships? Like you mentioned, maybe it's hard to feed somebody this month or something, hard to feed your family this month, that there was a relationship with your neighbors in that way. Did you have memories like that?
Oh, absolutely. There was a little old lady named Miss Johnson that lived right next door to us. And I remember that she took in, I didn't know at the time that that's what she was doing and why she was doing it, but she took in a husband and wife couple that, and her house was a beautiful, beautiful house on the inside and out. But she took in a husband and wife couple to help with her bills, and we all did things like help one another and share when we had an abundance of things. My stepfather, used to go to Canada and he used to go to Point Pelee, which is like a half an hour outside of Windsor. It was a beautiful park. It's still a park there, okay, but it's changed quite a bit. But he used to go there and go fishing for minnow. He had a truck, and he would take these 50-gallon garbage pails, and he would go and scoop the minnow up and bring it all back. And then my mother wouldn't clean them, because you didn't really have to clean them, but she dispersed them throughout the neighborhood. So we shared various things. We didn't let stuff go to waste.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
What did Black Bottom mean to you?
Black Bottom was home.
Mm-hmm.
I went to school there. I had friends there. And I hate that I don't have memories as far as pictures are concerned, because some years ago I lost a lot of my memorabilia stuff that I had, and this would have been the perfect opportunity to share it, because when I did finally get married, I even lived there, 1327 East Hancock, for a while, until my husband and I were able to move out and get our own apartment. So I had pictures of my firstborn, my daughter, and of course it would have shown some of the background. So unfortunately, but that was home for me. I didn't know anything outside of Black Bottom. I didn't know anything about the east side. I didn't know anything about the west side of Detroit. I was particularly focused right there where I lived. I grew up there, and I went to school there, and I even worked there, until I actually got out of the neighborhood. And then that's when I got out and got to had the ability to explore other portions of, Detroit. But Black Bottom was home.
Mm-hmm.
It was home.
When did you leave?
I left because I had gotten married. I left long before no, that's not true. That's not true now that I'm thinking about it, because I have this vivid memory when they started laying I-75. I have this vivid memory of my brother and I riding that pure white cement where they were laying I-75. We used to take, on off hours and off days, we used to take our bicycles and ride down, onto the cement and just race back and forth. So I can't say, when I graduated high school, I was still living in Black Bottom, but I think they had started pouring the cement uh, outward bound. I think they started coming from downtown Detroit. I can't be sure about that, but I have memories about them pouring it. So, and I don't remember exactly when it was completely done or destroyed. All I know is that my mother had to move, and she was not happy about it because, again, it was home. We all had so many memories tied up in it, and I remember, like I said, my house was on Hancock. This was Russell. This was Rivard. And right on the corner of Warren and Rivard, Warren Avenue Baptist Church. That's where I went to church. And I remember the very next street over was Hastings. And Hastings is where all the happenings were. And remember, I told you I had a sister who was 10 years older than I. So she was kind of fast because, of course, she was older than I was. And she would go to the movies. She would go, up on Hastings to, I guess, where the bars and things were. But again, because my mother kept me close to the vest, I didn't really get a chance to explore that area. Of course, we did drive through there with me in the car from time to time. I know there was a theater there. I know there were bars there. And I even know that there was a doctor's office. I think there was more than one doctor's office there. But as far as being able to give you pictures and things, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. That's true for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What was the reason that you understood when you were younger for 75 being laid down, or even understanding why Black Bottom was being destroyed?
I didn't. I was a little innocent girl. I was, living under my mother and stepfather's wing. I had no desire to even investigate what was going on. All I knew is that, like I said, my brother and I, we were having fun because you didn't have to run over the curbs. You didn't have any anything that you had to run over that was not smooth, and we just went down there and raced from one end to the other. So to be honest with you, it wasn't until I got older that I started understanding what happened. As far as racism and everything was concerned, I didn't have a clue. It was almost like I was sheltered, and then again, because my mother kept me so close, to her, I didn't explore and find out about all that negative energy that was going on. So to be honest, I had no clue, not until I got older, not until much later in life did I realize what had happened and how things are done in those kind of areas. I didn't even learn it in school. Okay, it wasn't until sometimes you can hear bits and pieces, because keep in mind now, back during that time, adults didn't talk around children. Okay, if there was a serious conversation going on that they wanted to have, or they'd kick you out of not only the room, the house. Go play, go outside and play. And they'd have their conversations. So I wasn't even privy to that kind of stuff. It wasn't until later on, when I got older, that I started hearing and understanding some things about what had happened in this locale and what had happened in this state and so on and so forth. And then I started to look at Detroit and try to understand what had happened. I became a storyteller. I was associated with the Black Storytellers and Paradise Valley. We went down, and there's a business down there that hosts story time, storytelling every summer. And we would do things like put on stories for not just the kids, but for the neighborhood. And so, of course, I had to do some research. I had information started filtering to me. So I found out, what happened to Paradise Valley. And some people associate Paradise Valley and Black Bottom together, but those are two different entities, So I didn't know at the time. I just didn't know.
How were you and your family impacted by the destruction of Black Bottom?
we were impacted because of the fact we were uprooted. We were uprooted out of the neighborhood, out of the community. We lost touch with a lot of people. And even today, when I go through that area, it kind of makes me sad because nothing looks the same the way it doesn't even resemble any portions of the way it looked when I lived in that area. I remember that there were houses side by side, and most of the houses did not have driveways. There was just a walkway between the houses to get to the backyard. And Warren Avenue, there was, excuse me, there was always Warren Avenue and Forest. One went one way and the other one went the other way, you know. And they built the DOT structure on Warren Avenue, you know, widened the street, and it just, nothing is the same. So it was like everything was just ripped out from under us. You know what I mean? And it's, even today, it's hurtful to look at it because I remember all of those houses, Brush, Beaubien, St. Antoine, and, you know, Russell, Rivard, all of those streets they go through. And now, of course, they don't do any of that, and none of the houses are there. Excuse me. So it just, you know, it just sticks a pin in you and make you feel some kind of way, you know, because of everything that was is no more.
Yeah. How do you understand present day Black Detroiters to be impacted today by the destruction of Black Bottom?
Oh, it goes much further than Black Bottom because I had no idea what redlining was. I had no idea what the wall that they built. I had, what is that, off of 8 Mile?
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea the destruction of so many other neighborhoods and things that went on, you know. So Black Bottom, to be honest, to me, is tied into pretty much the destruction of areas where Black people lived, okay? Because they picked and made a choice about where, even when they tore up Black Bottom, they chose a certain area that they wanted to direct you to. And most Blacks, as far as real estate is concerned, were not educated, had no clue about how to fight for themselves, had no clue what was being done to them, had no clue about redlining, had no clue about the kind of loans that they were making or not making available. So to me, Black Bottom is tied into pretty much everything that goes on in Detroit, that has gone on with the Black families or Black communities.
Mm-hmm. And there's a plan to redevelop I-375.
Oh, don't mention that to me. Don't even do it, because that just makes me go.
Can you share more?
Sure. They tore up all of that to put 375. Now Duggan is trying to make it seem like he's throwing us a bone, you know, by tearing up 375 and putting housing or making the road, you know, do something different. And 9 times out of 10, Blacks, African American, moderate level people won't be able to afford to live there, okay? It's going to be high end, just like everything else that they're doing downtown Detroit. I watched how when they first started the gentrification, there were Black businesses downtown Detroit. Right, I'm not happy with it. It doesn't make sense to me because they tore up everything to do that. They had a plan as far as what they were going to do to move the African American out of the neighborhood. Now, I watched as downtown Detroit, became unavailable to Blacks. And let me tell you how. It became unavailable to Blacks because there were blacks that had businesses downtown Detroit for years. And what they did was they went up on their lease so that they couldn't afford to stay. They had no choice but to move. Okay? The apartment building on Washington Boulevard, it had senior citizens in it and low income individuals. They went through and pretty much did the same thing for that. They raised their rents, put it at market rate, where these people, some of them had low income, housing, Section 8 maybe, I'm not even sure about the statistics, but they fixed it so they could not stay and they had to move. And they're doing the same thing. They're sending the rent up to market rate so that the brothers and sisters can't live there, but the whites can come in from the suburbs and live there. So their plan to tear up 375, it does not make a heck of a lot of sense to me. Okay, because it's not gonna do anything for us. It's not gonna do anything, as far as I'm concerned, for our community. So they might as well just leave it like it is.
And if it was to be geared towards doing something to repair the harm that was done to Black Detroiters, what would that look like?
Oh my gosh, what would that look like? They have gotten so far into and so deep into what they're doing. I'm not even sure that they probably have to have an agreement with the government to print enough money to be able to do what needed to be done to cover some of the harm that's been done to the black community, that's been done to the African American man and woman and family. Because each year, to me, it just gets more and more. Because to be honest with you, look at history. Look at what they're doing. Look behind the scenes. Like they say sometimes in the movie, follow the money. Okay? They haven't done anything. Duggan makes it seem like he's doing some things or has done some things to help with, the harm that's been done to the African American. He hasn't. And I don't think he will. Not in that regard.
So they're saying that there will be potentially 20 to 30 acres of open land available for development. If they were to say that land should be designated to help repair the harm that was done, what would be there? What would you want to see there?
First of all, it would depend on where it is.
Mm-hmm.
Because like I said earlier, when they started tearing up Black Bottom and other areas where they shut people out, African Americans out, they had a specific place where they designated for them to move to. So it would depend, first and foremost, where is it?
Mm-hmm.
Second of all, I'd like to see businesses, thriving businesses, be able to move there and make a living, do some of the things that they need to do. I'd like to see money filtered toward them, grants filtered toward them to help them thrive, to help them be successful. I'd like to see just an area. I remember at one time they were talking about, just like we have Chinatown, and I remember one time they were talking about having African town or whatever. I don't know what came of that, because I was really disappointed that they didn't necessarily follow through with it. But I'd like to see them carve out some space where, yes, we can have an area where we can thrive, and then where they can support it to the point where they filter things into that particular environment to make it successful, to help make it successful. Do us like y'all do to white folks. Don't tax us, okay? Do us like y'all doing Dan Gilbert. Act like we've got $6,500 million, okay? Don't tax us, okay? Let us be and let us make a living, because black people have always worked their butts off, okay? And then here you come with the government, and the government wants to stick their finger in it and take it. Okay, but when it comes to the white man that has money, okay, they're telling him, oh, you don't have to pay taxes. Okay, the Chaldeans or the Arabs that are coming into our country, doing them for 70 years or 10 years or whatever. Don't quote me because I'm not specific on it, but telling them they don't have to pay taxes. Okay, and it seems like everybody but the African American community has gotten a break. But where's ours? You know, what are you going to do for us to make it so that we can be successful? Leave us alone. We might be able to do it on our own if you just leave us alone and stop taking. That's what I would like to see.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Is there anything that we haven't talked about in regards to Black Bottom that you want to share?
Anything that we haven't talked about Black Bottom that I'd like to share? Not really, other than the fact that, well, I think I did say how Black Bottom was a loving, thriving community, and in taking that away from the African American community, it's almost like the younger generation didn't get a chance to grow up and see that. So to be honest with you, they don't know how to be a community. And I believe that it has to do with the fact, I believe that it has to do with the fact that they didn't see it. For your kids, a lot of times you have to model a certain behavior, okay? You have to be able to give them, my mother used to say, and it's funny because at the time when she would say it, I had no clue just exactly how it was going to affect me. But she used to say, do as I say and not as I do. Mama, that don't work. That doesn't work. You know, because for my growth, I have to see you modeling a certain something so that I can say, you know what? My mama did it like this. Okay? And I understand why mama did it like that. And it makes a difference for me. So part of what I believe is going on with our generational youngsters coming up is the fact that they don't know how to do some of those things and be a family, to be a loving family, to be a community, you know, to live next door to somebody and share if you see them in need, you know, and not be mean and hateful, that kind of thing. So that's just my thought on that particular topic.
Thank you. That was beautiful.
Thank you.